Hello, I'm Russet Lederman. Thank you for inviting me to present Then and Now, Japanese Women Photographers of the 1970s and 80s, revealed through their photo books. In March 2014, the Hasselblad Foundation presented Japanese photographer Ishiuchi Miyako with its annual award. Ishiuchi, who has spent more than 35 years pursuing a photographic vision that explores time and surface filtered through memory, is among only a handful of female photographers from Japan's post-war scene, when a new and distinctly Japanese photographic vision emerged. During the 1970s, the West discovered post-war Japanese photography through several survey exhibitions. Surprisingly, only one show included a female photographer, Ishiuchi Miyako. Despite their exclusion, there were several active female photographers besides Ishiuchi. A few were students or assistants of well-known male photographers such as Moriyama Daido, Araki, and Tamatsu. And as is the custom in the Japanese photographic community, their work was presented principally in photo book format. This presentation will look at the careers of Ishiuchi Miyako, Ishikawa Mao, and Nishimura Tamiko, three women photographers who first came into the Japanese photography scene in the 70s and 80s, and the trajectories of their careers and increased recognition in light of recent re-edits and reinterpretations of their influential photo books. Originally inexpensive self-published editions, these books are now quite rare. However, a recent interest in post-war Japanese photo books has fueled an explosion in reprints and reinterpretations of many of the hard-to-find books from this period. Given the current high cost of the original releases, these reinterpretations have become the primary access to many early photo book experiments by Japanese photographers. Part of this surge in reissues has led to a reintroduction of many of the important photo books by women photographers and a reevaluation of their role in the history of post-war Japanese photography. Among Japanese photographers, the historical precedent for an ongoing reinterpretation of existent imagery is quite common, with the results acting as a facsimile or an opportunity to engage in a reworking of earlier images. In the case of Ishiuchi, who currently has a retrospective at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, these later reinterpretations provide a means to observe the origins of visual themes that continue to permeate her work. For Ishikawa and Nishimura, the photo book reinterpretations are an introduction to an expanded audience. Ishiuchi is the rare woman photographer who has had a sustained visibility in both the West and Japan. Over her career, there have been periodic solo and group exhibitions in the West of images from her 1976 to 1980 Yokosuka story. It's actually Yokosuka trilogy, a series documented in three photo books: Apartment from 1978, Yokosuka Story from 1979, and Endless Night from 1981. Her iconic voice was shaped by the political and social unrest of the late 60s and early 70s, and by her perseverance in navigating the prevalent boys' club mentality of Japanese photography. There were few female role models in Japan at the time. As Ishiuchi notes, there were a lot of women who wanted to do something in photography, and one after another, I saw their efforts come to nothing. Born in 1947, Ishiuchi's childhood was deeply imprinted by the psychic fallout of Japan's surrender at the end of World War II. Raised in Yokosuka, a city with a large naval base that was a daily reminder of Japan's continued post-war occupation of American forces, Ishiuchi hated her hometown and couldn't wait to leave it. Yet Yokosuka looms large in Ishiuchi's work, and her images of military buildings, streets, and social clubs possess a quiet power that act as a container for the passage of time. Ishiuchi never intended to be a photographer. Rather, she began her art studies at Tama Art University in Tokyo as a design major, later switching to textiles. This was the late 60s and early 70s, when radical student protests and feminist activities consumed many Japanese university campuses. Ishiuchi was sympathetic to the New Left student movement and ultimately withdrew from university. spending the next 5 years working odd jobs. These seemingly directionless years, combined with her social and political awakening, planted the seeds for a distinctive form of self-expression that would coalesce when she was gifted a camera in 1975. She set off in search of a meaningful subject that would not only reflect what she saw, but also what she felt. After a few failed attempts, she realized that her subject lay in Yokosuka, the site of haunting childhood memories, colored by her disgust for the American military. Shortly after photographing in Yokosuka for the first time, Ishiuchi included several dark and unsettling images of her hometown in 2 exhibitions in 1975 and 76. Ishiuchi's work was well received by several of the prominent Provoke-era photographers who attended the show. She recounts, "Araki said, 'If you want a show at Nikon Salon, bring some photos over.' It wasn't really clear to whom he was talking, but when I heard that, I spoke up and said, 'Sure, I'll do it,' though only once." With nothing to lose, Ishiuchi brought a stack of photos to the Nikon Salon, the most famous gallery in Tokyo. She was already establishing a name for herself in the photography community through her collaboration in the groundbreaking feminist Hyako Ryoran, or Riot of Flowers, exhibition in 1976. Ishiuchi showed Araki and Minky June, the gallery director, over 100 prints that she had shot in Yokosuka. Impressed, Minky offered Ishiuchi her first solo show in 1977. Although Yokosuka Story was her first photographic series, it was her second book. Joining forces with Yada Taku, her university colleague, she created a publishing company and self-financed Yokosuka Story and Apartment. Both books, along with Endless Night, the third in the trilogy, are noted for their high production value and attention to detail. While Ishiuchi selected all the photographs, Yada served as the book editor. There are many similarities between the 2 books. Both are softcover editions with the same dimensions, yet each has a very distinct vision in terms of content and design. Where Yokosuka Story uses full-bleed images to document Ishiuchi's return to the ghosts of her hometown streets, white borders frame the photographs in Apartment, a body of work that looks at the cramped urban spaces of early post-war communal apartments. Apartment presents a bittersweet view of a vanishing lifestyle as seen in images that include crowded cubbies overflowing with bathroom slippers and dark corridors lined with curtains. Endless Night evolved as Ishiuchi was working on the Apartment series. She became conscious that some of the buildings she was photographing were brothels that had been converted into residences. The stark images in Endless Night show the now-defunct hostess bars that filled the back alleys of Japanese cities. Imbued with a palpable sadness, Ishiuchi's photos take on a highly personal voice as they speak to a private and public sense of loss. The response to the trilogy was strong, but with most of the text in Japanese, the books were exclusively sold in Japan. She received support from her male peers, but not without a sexist undercurrent. Araki, who wrote the Japanese-only afterwards in Yokosuka Story, spends much of his text talking about how hot Ishiuchi is in her black t-shirt and jeans. And as Ishiuchi states, "I had no mentors or teachers in my career since I never studied photography. I had the opportunity to hang out with many talented male photographers, but it is easy to stereotype and assume that since I am a woman, I had a mentoring relationship with them." A Western desire to learn more about Ishiuchi's early work arose in 2004 when the MFA in Houston mounted a major survey exhibition of Japanese photography that included several early Ishiuchi prints. With her original trilogy quite scarce by this point, the only access to these images was through several less expensive Japanese reinterpretations that began appearing in the 1990s. Ota Michitaka of Sokyusha in Tokyo, the renowned publisher of Fukase's 1986 Ravens book, worked with Ishiuchi to publish Yokosuka again in 1998. The book relates to an exhibition that Ishiuchi mounted in 1980 in an abandoned cabaret on Gutter Alley, a street in Yokosuka's CDGI entertainment district that she had avoided as a child. As a bilingual edition, Yokosuka Again was the first reinterpretation published with an international audience in mind. Ota published several other books by Ishiuchi, including a 2007 book entitled Clubs and Courts Yokosuka, Yokohama, which continues her exploration of abandoned GI clubs. In addition, Wide Shupan released Endless Night 2001, a re-envisioning of the third book in the trilogy. All of these books were published with bilingual texts. Japanese photographers see bodies of work in book form very naturally from the inception of a photographic idea, states Andrew Roth, a gallerist and publisher who in 2007 held an Ishiuchi exhibition in New York that combined the Clubs and Courts images with the apartment series. In 2010, Roth mounted a second exhibition and published a re-edit of the Yokosuka trilogy in a new volume entitled Sweet Home Yokosuka. The bilingual publication does not include any of the original essays or the provocative Iraqi text from Yokosuka Story. Rather, Sweet Home Yokosuka includes a new essay by renowned female film director Ishikawa Mao. The book was initially priced at $85 and sold to a diverse audience in both the West and Japan. As Roth explains, more people have Sweet Home Yokosuka and know Ishiuchi's work through that than through the now rare original books. The political upheaval of the early 70s was a fertile period for quite a few Japanese women photographers, many of whom still remain relatively unknown in the West. Ishikawa Mao, born in 1953, is an outspoken female photographer whose images are fueled by the distinctive political climate of her native Okinawa and the American military installations that populate the island. Discovering photography at 16 years old, Ishikawa emerged as a photographer during a period of intense protests around the renewal of the Ampo Treaty and the Vietnam War. She was tempted to give up photography, but witnessed a demonstration in which an Okinawan policeman was brutally beaten. As she recounts, "The policeman just lay down and died. I ran away crying. I thought, what can I do to teach Okinawans this history? That's when I decided to become a photographer." Like Ishiuchi, who asked her family to reallocate money set aside for a future wedding towards the production of her photo books, Ishikawa refused her mother's offer of an expensive coming-of-age kimono and instead requested to use the funds to study under Tomatsu at his workshop school of photography in Tokyo in 1974. Her 3 months at the school initiated a lifelong relationship with Tomatsu, a frequent visitor to Okinawa. Upon her return from Tokyo, Ishikawa began to focus on her home island, her neighbors, and the American military that overshadowed much of Okinawan life. She became fascinated with the U.S. soldiers in Okinawa and their interactions with local women in the Kintown Entertainment District bars. Ishikawa sought employment at one of the bars catering to African-American servicemen from Camp Hansen. The images that she created from 1976 to 77, while she worked as a hostess, focus on a community often looked down upon by her fellow Okinawans. As Ishikawa recounts, the women who worked in the bars came to kin because of some tough life situations. From them, I learned how wonderful it is to live freely and defiantly. Deeply engaged with the intimate lives of the Japanese women and American soldiers who frequented the bars, Ishikawa's photos explicitly document the social interactions of two marginalized groups. In 1977, Ishikawa shared her images with Tomatsu, who, along with Iraqi, recommended her work for an exhibition at the Minolta Photo Space in Tokyo. As Ishikawa recounts, women of kin met with much astonishment and praise because a barmaid for a Black Soldiers Club, that is me, took photos of colleagues. Ishikawa won Best Work Award and was a bit bewildered by the attention, since she was most definitely an outsider in Japanese photography circles. 5 years later, Ishikawa, in collaboration with the photographer Higa Toyomitsu, published Hot Days in Camp Hansen, a book that presents her Kintown photos. With no direct bookstore distribution, Ishikawa sold the book independently, sending out the first 200 copies through a magazine's mail-order operation. However, included in the photographs in Hot Days in Camp Hansen were two of Ishikawa's friends who were not working at the bar. Fearful of social repercussions, these women requested that their images be removed from the book. Ishikawa agreed to redact the images from the remaining books and give them all the negatives from her Kintown series. Although Hot Days in Camp Hansen from that moment onward became unavailable, Ishikawa continued to work on other series related to the Kintown images. Life in Philly from 2010, published by Zen Photo Gallery and Gallery Out of Place, both in Tokyo, evolved from a visit that Ishikawa took in 1986 to Philadelphia to visit one of the African-American servicemen she had befriended in Kintown. Having returned to the U.S. in 1977, he was living in a low-income Philadelphia neighborhood. What she photographed in his community were the derelict street corners, drug dealers, and intimate lives of his friends and neighbors. And as with her earlier images, Ishikawa used her camera to extract exceedingly personal and raw views of her subject. Despite exhibiting copies of pages from Hot Days in Camp Hansen in a group show at PS1 in New York in 2004, it was Ishikawa's Life in Philly book that brought her early work to the attention of Western viewers. Shortly after the book's release, Zen Photo mounted an exhibition that combined Ishikawa's few remaining Hot Days in Camp Hansen prints with the more recent Life in Philly series. In 2012, Ishikawa's daughter found hundreds of unpublished images from her mother's Kintown days. Because of that discovery, Ishikawa was able to publish the bilingual Hot Days in Okinawa with a Japanese imprint foil in 2013, a book that evokes the same defined voice as the earlier Hot Days in Camp Hansen publication. This same lack of sustained recognition and more recent discovery can also be seen in the career trajectory of Nishimura Tamiko, a photographer who was born in 1948 and studied at the Tokyo Photography College in the late 1960s. Less influenced by an overt political agenda, Nishimura's images are nonetheless a record of the freedoms afforded young Japanese women in the wake of older traditions giving way to modern Japan. Upon her graduation in '69, Nishimura was working part-time in the offices of Taki Koji, a writer and photographer who was a founding member of Provoke magazine. Her responsibilities included assisting Provoke photographers Moriyama and Nakahira Takuma with their prints and contact sheets in the magazine's darkroom. She remembers, "I was able to see very closely how they worked, how Moriyama took his images. I also printed more than 100 contact sheets for Nakahira's first book, For a Language to Come." Although not a direct mentoring relationship, Nishimura was deeply influenced by the grainy, blurry, out-of-focus style she saw in the Provoke darkroom. Yet her synthesis of this aesthetic is distinctly her own and filtered through a subtler perspective that is more concerned with the social changes in Japan than with a direct political commentary. In the 1970s, Japan National Railways launched Discover Japan, an advertising campaign targeting solo travelers and women. Nishimura was among those enticed by these advertisements. From '69 to '72, she was working the occasional magazine assignment to garner the funds to take solo trips whenever work was slow. Traveling mostly by train and bus, her photographs, many depicting women, are purposefully unplanned and are the consequence of chance encounters. Whether a grainy landscape with a girl riding her bicycle or the blurred image of a couple bathing on a moonlight terrain, Nishimura's images feel like stolen, intimate moments. Their lack of artifice and imprecise compositions convey a refreshing spontaneity that quietly documents time and place that no longer exist. The results of these various road trips around Japan are collected in Shikishima from 1973, a book published and financed by the Tokyo Photography College. The book was part of a short-lived series released by the college to showcase recent graduates, and Nishimura was responsible for Shikishima's production and Japanese-only text. Mark Pearson of Zen Photo, who would publish in 2014 a facsimile edition of the now rare book, recounts his impression upon first seeing the original. It was particularly fascinating to see Nishimura's work as a rare counterpoint to the male photographers of the period, who often photographed the patrons of after-hours bars. In contrast, Shikishima is a sensitive book comprised of poetic images. 1,000 copies were printed, and Nishimura actively showed the book and prints to several Japanese magazine and photography editors. Despite the Tokyo-based Takaishi Gallery mounting a 25th anniversary exhibition of the prints in 1998, Nishimura remained unknown in the West. However, the Takaishi show could be seen as a turning point, although it did take another 14 years for Shikishima to begin showing up in rare bookshops. In the interim, particularly after 2005, Nishimura exhibited regularly and published several other books in Japan related to more recent series. In 2012, Graphica in Tokyo published Eternal Chase, a book of photographs that Nishimura took in the 70s, after the completion of Shikishima. It is distinctive for being a selection made by a photographer looking back upon her earlier images. Similar to Shikishima, Eternal Chase is a road trip book that reflects a changing Japan. In 2014, Shikishima finally became accessible to a broader audience with the publication of the facsimile edition and the original's inclusion in the third volume of Badger Parr, the photo book, A History. A replica of the original with the intent to introduce Nishimura's earliest work, the facsimile includes an English translation of Nishimura's original essay, accompanied by a new text in which she reflects upon her earlier photographs. While working on the facsimile, Nishimura shared additional images with the publisher, who decided to add a new volume to accompany the original. The entire package, now priced at $60, effectively brings a previously neglected Japanese woman photographer to audiences in both Japan and the West. Although Nishimura and Ishikawa are finally gaining visibility in the West through recent publications that reference their early important photo books, they are still relatively unknown compared to their male peers from the 1970s. It is far too simple to say it has been a result of sexism and Orientalist perspective. As noted above, these women were to some degree supported by their male peers, admittedly in complicated ways. Yet none of the three women indicate a mentor. Instead, they all emphasized that they worked independently. With the Getty Museum's Ishiuchi retrospective on view, along with an associated exhibition of 5 young Japanese women photographers, a rethinking of the critical role that female photographers have played in Japan's photographic history is underway. However, there are still a number of obstacles in the presentation of Japanese photography in the museum setting. With the photo book an important means of viewing early post-war works, exhibition designers and curators continue to explore appropriate ways to show these fragile books. It is therefore quite common that access to Ishiuchi, Ishikawa's, and Nishimura's early images is facilitated through the reprints and reinterpretations found online, in bookstores, and at photo book fairs. And with this access, there is an expanded understanding of the diverse voices that shaped post-war Japanese photography. Thank you.